Los Angeles harbors secrets that tourists never discover, realities that glossy brochures and Hollywood movies have deliberately buried beneath layers of glamour and fantasy. What was once advertised as the promised land of opportunity has transformed into a monument to human inequality and environmental degradation. And while millions of visitors snap photos on the Walk of Fame and gaze at Beverly Hills mansions, few understand the true story of what we sacrificed to create this sprawling metropolis. Have you ever wondered what happened to the communities who lived here before the studios erected their empires? The truth you'll discover in the next 28 minutes will forever change how you see America's entertainment capital, Los Angeles. The name conjures images of palm-lined boulevards, golden beaches, and the iconic Hollywood sign, watching over a city where dreams supposedly come true. A manufactured paradise receiving over 50 million tourists annually, all seeking their slice of California magic. But this paradise demands a price few acknowledge, a human, environmental, and cultural cost, concealed behind the practiced smiles of street performers and meticulously curated Instagram locations. Before 1900, Los Angeles was barely recognizable compared to today's megalopolis. A modest settlement with less than 100,000 residents, surrounded by pristine wetlands, ancient oak woodlands, and one of North America's most diverse ecosystems. A natural wonder that indigenous Tongva people considered sacred for thousands of years, providing abundant food, medicine, and spiritual connection through its rivers, valleys, and coastal plains. The Tongva lived in sophisticated balance with these ecosystems, following seasonal cycles that maintained ecological harmony across what would later become America's second-largest urban center. Grizzly bears roamed hills now covered in luxury homes. Steelhead trout migrated up free-flowing rivers now entombed in concrete. The night sky blazed with stars unobscured by today's perpetual light pollution. Everything changed when land speculators and industrial tycoons set their sights on this fertile basin beside the Pacific. Eastern investors and local power brokers orchestrated one of history's greatest real estate schemes, manufacturing an image of Mediterranean paradise to attract migrants from across America. They marketed Los Angeles as a utopia when it barely had enough water to support its existing population, explains Dr. Sarah Reynolds, environmental historian who has documented the region's transformation over 3 decades. The entire city was essentially built on elaborate marketing and resource theft. What few realize is that this transformation required the systematic displacement of entire communities. The original Tongva inhabitants had already faced devastating dispossession during Spanish colonization and subsequent Mexican and American rule. But even established Mexican-American neighborhoods that had survived for generations were deliberately fragmented by infrastructure projects explicitly designed to serve new, predominantly white communities. My grandmother's entire neighborhood in Chavez Ravine was destroyed to build Dodger Stadium, remembers Elena Rodriguez, 73. The city used eminent domain, claiming it was for public housing, then handed the land to a private baseball franchise. Hundreds of families lost everything. The newspapers barely covered it. Black and Latino communities faced similar fates as highway planners strategically routed freeways through their neighborhoods, demolishing homes while carefully circumventing wealthier, whiter areas. Urban renewal became a euphemism for erasing communities of color. Their cultural landmarks, gathering places, and historical connections were buried beneath asphalt and concrete, sacrificed on the altar of automotive convenience and racial segregation disguised as progress. The freeway system wasn't just about transportation, notes urban historian Robert Washington. It was social engineering with concrete. Just look at how Interstate 10 cuts straight through historically black neighborhoods while bending around Beverly Hills. That wasn't coincidence, it was design. The violence of this displacement wasn't merely physical, but psychological and cultural. Families who had built intergenerational connections and support networks suddenly found themselves scattered across the expanding metropolis, their social fabric torn apart.
Cultural institutions, churches, markets, community centers that had anchored neighborhood life were demolished without ceremony or commemoration.
The trauma of this forced relocation continues echoing through generations, creating wounds that remain unhealed and largely unacknowledged in official histories. When they destroyed our neighborhood for that freeway, they didn't just take our homes, they took our community, explains 91-year-old Franklin Thomas, who lived through the construction of the Harbor Freeway through South Central in the 1950s. We had networks where neighbors watched each other's children, shared meals, celebrated together. You can't rebuild that overnight somewhere else. Some of those neighbors I never saw again. That kind of loss doesn't appear in any environmental impact report. The second dark secret that travel guides never mention, the environmental destruction has been catastrophic, transforming one of North America's most ecologically diverse regions into a concrete landscape where less than 10% of original habitat remains. To create the sprawling metropolis we know today, over 95% of local wetlands were drained and paved. Ancient woodlands were cleared for subdivisions. The once mighty Los Angeles River, lifeblood of indigenous communities for millennia, was channelized into what looks like a massive storm drain, destroying riverine ecosystems that had evolved over thousands of years. The natural watershed system, which once captured rainfall and replenished groundwater aquifers, was replaced with impermeable surfaces that funnel precious precipitation directly into the ocean along with toxic urban runoff. Every time it rains in Los Angeles, billions of gallons of fresh water, enough to supply thousands of homes, rush uselessly into the Pacific carrying oil, trash, and pollutants, explains hydrologist Michael Chen. Meanwhile, the city spends millions importing water from hundreds of miles away, depleting distant ecosystems to maintain lawns in a semi-desert. The city's infamous smog represents another environmental catastrophe that shaped public health for generations. The unique geography of the Los Angeles basin, mountains on 3 sides and ocean on the 4th, creates a natural bowl that traps pollutants. When coupled with Southern California sunshine, vehicle emissions transform into photochemical smog, creating the perfect conditions for respiratory disease. For decades, children growing up in Los Angeles suffered asthma rates far above the national average, with communities near freeways and industrial zones bearing the heaviest burden. The distribution of this pollution follows the familiar pattern of environmental racism seen throughout the city's development. Communities with the least political power received the greatest environmental burden. Neighborhoods like Boyle Heights found themselves surrounded by freeways on all sides, with industrial facilities and freight corridors adding to the toxic load. Children growing up in these areas developed asthma at rates 5 to 6 times higher than those in coastal communities just 15 miles away. My classroom sometimes had half the students missing because of asthma attacks on bad air days, remembers Juanita Mendoza, who taught elementary school in East Los Angeles for 34 years. These were 8-year-olds carrying inhalers, struggling to breathe while just trying to learn multiplication. Meanwhile, across town, children played outside in cleaner air without thinking twice about it. That's not natural, it's the result of decades of deliberate decisions about whose health matters. Did you know that certain Los Angeles neighborhoods have air quality so poor that residing there is equivalent to smoking several cigarettes daily? Studies by public health researchers have documented how life expectancy can vary by over 12 years between affluent coastal communities and industrial neighborhoods just 15 miles away. One of America's starkest examples of environmental injustice hidden in plain sight. The third secret involves extreme social inequality concealed just beyond the tourist corridors. Mere blocks from celebrity haunts and 5-star hotels exist some of America's largest homeless encampments, where over 60,000 people struggle for survival without reliable access to water, sanitation, or safety. Service workers who maintain the hospitality machine, cleaning hotel rooms, washing dishes in celebrity chef restaurants, landscaping luxury properties, often live in overcrowded apartments, working multiple jobs while still barely affording rent in America's most unaffordable housing market. Tourists see the Hollywood sign but miss the homelessness crisis happening right below it, says Maria Torres, housing advocate working with displaced families.
They'd be shocked to learn that the person who cleaned their luxury hotel suite might be sleeping in their car or spending 70% of their income on a studio apartment shared with relatives. Most service workers face soul-crushing commutes, leaving home before dawn and returning long after dark, sacrificing family time and quality of life to maintain the illusion of effortless luxury for visitors and wealthy residents. This housing crisis didn't happen naturally. It resulted from specific policy choices prioritizing property values over human needs. Los Angeles County builds luxury condominiums while systematically underproducing affordable housing. Zoning regulations preserve low-density neighborhoods for the wealthy while restricting higher-density development that could accommodate working families.
Rent control protections have been systematically weakened, allowing displacement of long-term residents when property values increase, a process euphemistically called gentrification that might more accurately be described as economic eviction. "I've lived in my apartment for 22 years, says Gloria Martinez, 64-year-old medical receptionist fighting eviction from her Silver Lake apartment. Now they've sold the building to investors who tripled the rent overnight. Where am I supposed to go? All my friends, my church, my doctor, everything is here. But apparently my community matters less than someone's investment portfolio." This economic disparity has created profound social tensions that occasionally erupt into public consciousness, but are quickly repressed in official narratives. The 1992 civil unrest following the Rodney King verdict wasn't a spontaneous explosion, but the inevitable result of decades of systematic disinvestment, over-policing, and economic abandonment of South Los Angeles communities. Yet 30 years later, many of these same neighborhoods continue struggling with food deserts, inadequate healthcare, and educational inequality, while just miles away, others live in unimaginable opulence. The fourth secret reveals Los Angeles's extreme economic vulnerability beneath its prosperous veneer. The entertainment industry that defines the city's global image employs just a fraction of its workforce, creating an economy more precarious than the palm tree fantasy suggests. When COVID-19 struck in 2020, unemployment in Los Angeles County surpassed 20%, exposing the fragility of an economy heavily dependent on tourism, entertainment, and service sectors.
"It was like watching a movie set collapse," recalls James Wilson, former restaurant manager. "Suddenly, the illusion vanished, and you could see the economic house of cards that had always been there." This vulnerability isn't new. Each time a recession hits, a writer's strike disrupts production, or global events reduce tourism, the economy teeters precariously. Local politicians consistently speak about economic diversification, but little concrete action materializes beyond rhetorical promises. The deeply unequal economic structure means that economic shocks disproportionately impact those with the fewest resources, exacerbating existing inequalities in a vicious cycle. Manufacturing jobs that once provided stable middle-class employment with benefits have largely disappeared, replaced by service industry positions offering lower wages, fewer protections, and minimal advancement opportunities.
Meanwhile, the high-wage tech sector, concentrated primarily on the West Side in areas like Santa Monica and Playa Vista, remains inaccessible to those without specialized education, creating what economists describe as a barbell economy with growth at the high and low ends but hollowing out in the middle. Los Angeles has effectively created two separate economies operating in the same geographic space, explains economist Dr. Jennifer Ramirez. One is globally connected, capital-rich, and resilient to economic shocks. The other is localized, resource-starved, and extraordinarily vulnerable. They might physically overlap on a map, but they function as parallel worlds with minimal interaction beyond service relationships. The fifth secret whispered by locals involves water, or rather the unsustainable illusion of water abundance in what remains fundamentally a semi-arid ecosystem. Los Angeles exists in its current form only through one of history's most ambitious water appropriation projects, diverting resources from hundreds of miles away through a complex system of aqueducts, tunnels, and pipelines. The infamous California Water Wars, dramatized in the film Chinatown, saw Los Angeles effectively colonize distant watersheds, draining the once fertile Owens Valley to quench the city's growing thirst.
The city's growth came at the expense of rural communities and ecosystems that were essentially sacrificed to fuel urban expansion. Mono Lake, an ancient saline lake east of the Sierra Nevada mountains, nearly collapsed as tributaries were diverted into Los Angeles aqueducts. The once thriving agricultural communities of the Owens Valley withered as their water was literally shipped away, leaving behind a legacy of environmental damage and economic depression that persists today. This tenuous water supply grows increasingly precarious as climate change intensifies drought cycles across the western United States. Lake Mead and the Colorado River system, which supplies significant portions of Southern California's water, have reached historically low levels. Meanwhile, within the city itself, wealth determines access to water abundance. During drought restrictions, working-class neighborhoods with small lots face strict enforcement, while mansion owners in Bel Air and Beverly Hills pay trivial fines to maintain lush tropical landscapes utterly inappropriate for the natural environment. We've built a city that requires stealing water from ecosystems hundreds of miles away just to exist, observes environmental justice advocate Sarah Thompson. That system worked in the 20th century when climate was more stable and political power could simply overrun rural communities' rights. It's increasingly untenable in our current reality. The sixth secret concerns Los Angeles' vulnerability to natural disasters, deliberately downplayed in the city's relentless self-promotion. Built at the intersection of multiple earthquake faults, the metropolis faces seismic threats that engineers and emergency planners acknowledge privately, while public officials maintain strategic silence. The Big One, a major earthquake that seismologists consider inevitable, could potentially leave America's second-largest city without water, power, or functional transportation systems for weeks or months. The city's emergency preparedness remains woefully inadequate for the scale of potential disasters, with particular concerns about older concrete buildings vulnerable to collapse. Many of these structures concentrate in lower-income neighborhoods where residents lack resources for evacuation or recovery. As with other environmental hazards, disaster vulnerability follows familiar patterns of inequality, with those least responsible for creating risks facing the greatest exposure to their consequences. Beyond earthquakes, climate change has intensified wildfire seasons, with blazes regularly threatening foothill communities and sending toxic smoke across the basin. Rising sea levels endanger coastal infrastructure, while the concrete channelization of waterways leaves other areas vulnerable to flash flooding during increasingly intense rain events, a devastating paradox for a drought-prone region. Los Angeles has built itself in almost deliberate defiance of its natural environment, notes disaster preparedness expert Dr. Robert Chen. We've constructed a metropolis of 20 million people in a location prone to fires, floods, earthquakes, landslides, and drought, often simultaneously. The infrastructure maintaining this artificial environment becomes more fragile every year, while population density increases. The seventh secret involves Hollywood itself, the dream factory that defined Los Angeles' global image while operating on exploitation mechanisms carefully concealed from public view. Behind the glamour of premier parties and celebrity culture exists an industrial system historically built on profound inequality, sexual exploitation, and labor abuses that continue evolving into new forms despite periodic reform efforts. For decades, the studio system functioned as a nearly feudal structure where executives wielded extraordinary power over performers' careers, personal lives, and basic dignity. The hashtag movement exposed just the latest chapter in a century-long pattern of powerful men leveraging career opportunities for sexual access to aspiring talent. Meanwhile, the less sensational but equally important exploitation of below-the-line workers, the grips, production assistants, security personnel, and catering staff who make productions possible, continues largely unaddressed. Everyone focuses on actors and directors, but most film workers live precarious lives moving between short-term jobs with punishing hours and few protections, explains film historian Alexandra Davis. The industry portrays itself as progressive while operating on labor practices that would shock most outsiders. 16-hour days, unsafe conditions, and rampant wage theft occur regularly on productions generating millions in profit. Even the basic economics of Hollywood perpetuates inequality through accounting practices deliberately designed to minimize official profitability. Films that earn hundreds of millions at the box office routinely show no paper profit through creative accounting, ensuring that those with profit participation contracts, often talent from marginalized backgrounds with less negotiating leverage, receive nothing, while studios channel revenues through subsidiaries and licensing arrangements. Beyond the production system itself lies Hollywood's profound cultural influence, shaping global perceptions through stories that predominantly reflect privileged perspectives. For decades, Los Angeles exported narratives that normalized whiteness, heteronormativity, and American exceptionalism, while marginalizing or stereotyping other experiences. These representational politics might seem abstract until recognizing their real-world consequences in everything from beauty standards to foreign policy. Hollywood created fantasy worlds that shaped how people worldwide understand reality, notes media critic Jonathan Lee. When you control the stories a culture consumes, you shape how they understand themselves and others. Los Angeles essentially built a global narrative factory that defined normal in ways that validated some experiences while rendering others invisible or problematic. The Eighth Secret reveals how Los Angeles's physical development deliberately engineered racial segregation into the city's very structure, creating patterns of inequality now literally set in concrete. Beyond the visible homeless crisis lies a deeper story of how discriminatory housing policies shaped every neighborhood. For decades, racially restrictive covenants explicitly prohibited property sales to non-white buyers in desirable areas. When these became officially illegal, redlining by banks and government agencies continued the same patterns through financial mechanisms instead of explicit rules. Los Angeles wasn't naturally segregated, it was deliberately designed that way, explains housing historian Dr. Morris.
James Carter examine property deeds from before 1948 in wealthy neighborhoods, and you'll find explicit language prohibiting sale to persons of African or Asiatic descent. These restrictions created generational wealth disparities that persist today. This segregation wasn't merely residential. It influenced everything from school quality to park access, public transportation routes, grocery store locations, and healthcare facilities. Environmental hazards like industrial sites, oil drilling operations, and high traffic corridors were consistently placed near communities with the least political power to resist. The physical organization of Los Angeles itself became a mechanism for distributing opportunity unequally, a system now literally embedded in concrete, asphalt, and institutional structures resistant to change. Even supposedly progressive environmental initiatives often reinforced existing inequalities.
The preservation of open space in wealthy neighborhoods like Pacific Palisades protected property values and recreational access for the privileged, while industrial zones expanded in East and South Los Angeles. The celebrated acquisition of Griffith Park, one of America's largest urban parks, came from a donor who explicitly prohibited black residents from entering, a restriction eventually ruled unconstitutional but reflective of the city's development ethos. The Ninth Secret concerns the dark reality of Los Angeles's food system, a metropolitan region built atop some of North America's most fertile farmland, now paradoxically struggling with widespread food insecurity. The county that once produced abundant fruits, vegetables, and dairy now contains vast urban food deserts where residents lack access to fresh, nutritious options despite living in one of the world's agricultural powerhouses. Los Angeles County has over 700,000 food-insecure children, notes nutritional justice advocate Maria Gutierrez. Meanwhile, enough food to feed them all many times over rots in dumpsters behind high-end grocery stores in wealthy neighborhoods just miles away. The industrialized food system serving the region optimizes for profit rather than nutrition or accessibility, creating absurd situations where produce grown just outside the city limits travels thousands of miles through processing and distribution systems before returning, often at prices unaffordable to working-class residents. This nutritional inequality manifests in health outcomes that vary dramatically by zip code.
Neighborhoods like Bel Air and Pacific Palisades enjoy some of America's highest life expectations and lowest chronic disease rates, while communities just 10 miles away suffer epidemic levels of preventable conditions like diabetes, heart disease, and obesity, direct consequences of systemically unequal food environments engineered over generations. The displacement of regional agriculture represents another hidden tragedy. Los Angeles County was once America's agricultural heartland, with fertile valleys producing everything from citrus to dairy. As development expanded, these productive landscapes were systematically paved over for suburban housing tracts and commercial developments. Today, most of the region's food arrives via carbon-intensive supply chains stretching thousands of miles, creating both environmental and economic vulnerabilities while disconnecting residents from the sources of their sustenance.
My grandfather's orange grove is now a shopping mall, says Richard Tanaka, whose Japanese-American family farmed in the San Fernando Valley before World War II internment and subsequent post-war development permanently altered the landscape. We grew food that fed thousands of local families. Now that land grows nothing but concrete and consumer debt. The 10th, and perhaps most profound secret, concerns Los Angeles' crisis of identity and community in a metropolis physically designed to prevent meaningful public life. Unlike cities developed before automobile dominance, Los Angeles lacks significant public spaces where citizens from different backgrounds naturally encounter one another. The privatized landscape of shopping malls, gated communities, and security-patrolled entertainment districts creates a city where meaningful cross-class interaction rarely occurs outside carefully choreographed commercial transactions. Public beaches theoretically provide democratic space for diverse interaction, yet even these natural resources become stratified through differential access. Residents without reliable transportation struggle to reach coastal areas, while parking costs and development patterns effectively privatize much of the shoreline despite legal guarantees of public access. The commodification of experience extends to nearly every aspect of Los Angeles life, creating environments where genuine community requires deliberate effort against architectural and social designs encouraging isolation. Los Angeles isn't really one city, it's dozens of separate realities barely acknowledging each other's existence, observes urban sociologist Dr. Elena Ramirez. A person can live their entire life here without meaningful interaction with people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. The wealthy rarely use public transportation or visit neighborhoods beyond their comfort zones. Working-class residents serve the affluent but remain effectively invisible as full human beings. This fragmentation produces a metropolis where civic identity struggles to transcend neighborhood boundaries. Public transportation projects face resistance from communities fearful of connecting to others. Housing initiatives battling homelessness encounter reflexive opposition from residents protecting property values. The physical isolation engineered into Los Angeles' development creates psychological isolation that undermines collective problem-solving and shared identity. Tourists come for Hollywood, beaches, and theme parks without realizing they're visiting a place that isn't really a unified city at all, explains community organizer Marcus Johnson. It's more like an archipelago of private islands connected by freeways, each operating with different rules, resources, and realities. That's the Los Angeles locals actually experience, not the fantasy version sold in travel brochures. Yet, amid these shadows, hopeful counter-narratives emerge from the communities most impacted by systemic inequality. Grassroots organizations in historically marginalized neighborhoods have developed innovative solutions to food insecurity, housing challenges, and environmental justice. Indigenous Tongva cultural revitalization movements reclaim erased histories. Community land trusts pioneer models for permanent, affordable housing in gentrifying areas. Urban agriculture projects transform vacant lots into productive gardens, providing fresh food and green space. These community-led initiatives represent a different vision for Los Angeles, one centered on mutual support rather than exploitation, sustainability rather than extraction, and collective well-being rather than privatized luxury. Worker cooperatives offering living wages and democratic workplace structures demonstrate alternatives to the standard economic model. Community-based clean energy projects show pathways toward climate resilience while creating local jobs. These emerging models suggest the possibility of development patterns that serve human needs rather than merely generating profit. We can't undo decades of harmful development overnight, acknowledges urban planner Sophia Chen. But we're seeing communities create alternatives that challenge the dominant narrative. Every community garden, affordable housing project, and grassroots transportation initiative represents people reclaiming agency in a city designed to disempower them. Young Angelenos, particularly from communities historically excluded from power, increasingly question the development model they've inherited. Environmental justice organizations in East and South Los Angeles have won significant victories against polluting industries. Housing advocates have secured tenant protections previously considered politically impossible. Public transportation expansions, though still inadequate, slowly reconnect a deliberately fragmented metropolis. Los Angeles wasn't ruined by natural forces or inevitable progress, emphasizes historian Robert Washington. Specific decisions by identifiable people created these problems. That means different decisions by today's residents can create different outcomes. The future isn't predetermined. The truth about Los Angeles defies simplistic narratives. It's neither paradise nor dystopia, but rather a complex urban experiment revealing fundamental contradictions in American development patterns. It serves as both a cautionary tale about prioritizing growth over sustainability and potential laboratory where solutions to these self-created problems might emerge through community innovation and political realignment. For millions of tourists, Los Angeles will remain primarily a backdrop for vacation photos and celebrity encounters. But for those willing to look beyond manufactured facades, the city's true stories offer valuable lessons about what we sacrifice when prioritizing appearance over substance, growth over sustainability, and private luxury over public good. Perhaps the greatest secret is that Los Angeles's future remains unwritten. Each resident who supports community-owned businesses over corporate chains, each voter who prioritizes affordable housing and public transportation over exclusionary policies, each visitor who ventures beyond tourist corridors to experience authentic neighborhoods contributes to writing the next chapter of this complicated story. If enough people begin seeing Los Angeles not as a collection of attractions, but as a living ecosystem of interconnected communities with shared destiny, perhaps its next transformation could be as dramatic as its first, but this time towards something more sustainable, equitable, and authentic than the celluloid fantasy that defined its past century. If this story impacted you, share it with others who care about urban futures. And if you plan to visit Los Angeles, remember that your choices hold power. The next chapter might reveal how a new generation of residents and thoughtful visitors are finally rewriting the rules for America's most misunderstood metropolis.